Imagine a conflict so vast, so brutal, it beggars the imagination. A war so immense that it stretched from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south, covering thousands of miles of territory. This was the Eastern Front of World War II, a front where the fate of nations was decided and the course of history was irrevocably altered. It was a struggle of unimaginable savagery, where entire armies clashed in a maelstrom of steel, fire, and blood. The scale of the battles was unprecedented, with millions of soldiers engaged in brutal combat. From the icy plains of Russia to the rubble-strewn streets of Berlin, the Eastern Front witnessed some of the most horrific battles in human history. The harsh winters and vast landscapes added to the misery and suffering of those involved. Millions upon millions perished, swallowed whole by a conflict that redefined barbarity. The human cost was staggering, with entire cities and communities wiped off the map. The numbers are staggering, almost impossible to grasp. The sheer scale of the devastation is hard to comprehend, with entire generations lost to the ravages of war. Estimates vary, but historians believe that over 30 million soldiers and civilians died on the Eastern Front. This staggering loss of life is a testament to the ferocity and relentlessness of the conflict. This wasn't just a war between armies. It was a total war that involved entire societies, where civilians were as much a part of the war effort as the soldiers on the front lines. It was a war of ideologies, a clash of civilizations that engulfed entire populations. The ideological battle between fascism and communism added a layer of intensity and brutality to the conflict. This wasn't the clean, surgical warfare envisioned by military strategists. It was chaotic, brutal, and devastating, with no clear front lines and no safe havens. This was a war of annihilation, where the very survival of nations, of entire peoples, hung in the balance. The destruction was so widespread that it left scars that would last for generations. The Eastern Front wasn't just a theater of war, it was a crucible where the fate of the 20th century was forged in blood and fire. The legacy of this brutal conflict continues to shape our world today, a stark reminder of the horrors of war. The seeds of this cataclysmic conflict were sown long before the first shot was fired. The political landscape of Europe was a tinderbox, with alliances and enmities crisscrossing the continent. The Treaty of Versailles had left Germany humiliated and economically crippled, fostering a deep resentment that would later be exploited by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party. In 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This agreement stunned the world, as the two ideologically opposed regimes had been bitter enemies. This seemingly unlikely alliance, born of mutual suspicion and a desire for territorial expansion, shocked the world. The pact included secret protocols dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, setting the stage for future conflicts. But behind the facade of diplomacy, both dictators harbored their own ambitions. Hitler saw the pact as a means to avoid a two-front war while he conquered Western Europe. Stalin, on the other hand, aimed to secure his western borders and buy time to build up the Soviet military. Hitler, driven by his twisted ideology, saw the vast lands of the Soviet Union as living space for the German people. He envisioned a new order in Europe dominated by the Aryan race, with the Slavic peoples subjugated or exterminated. Stalin, ever the paranoid tyrant, sought to buy time to strengthen his own regime and expand his empire. He was wary of Hitler's intentions, but believed he could outmaneuver the German dictator. The pact was never meant to last. It was a marriage of convenience, a temporary alignment of interests between two ruthless leaders. It was merely a temporary truce, a pause before the storm. Both sides knew that conflict was inevitable, and they used the time to prepare for the coming war. On June 22, 1941, the storm broke. Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, aimed at conquering the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's audacious plan to conquer the Soviet Union, was unleashed. The German war machine, with its blitzkrieg tactics, aimed to deliver a quick and decisive blow. 3 million German soldiers, along with their Axis allies, surged across the border in a three-pronged attack, targeting Leningrad, Moscow, and the oil fields of the Caucasus. The scale and speed of the invasion were unprecedented. The invasion, one of the largest in history, caught Stalin completely off guard. Despite numerous intelligence warnings, he refused to believe that Hitler would break the pact so soon. The initial German advance was swift and brutal. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg tactics overwhelmed the Soviet defenses, leading to rapid territorial gains. Soviet forces, poorly led and ill-equipped, were overwhelmed. The Red Army, still reeling from Stalin's purges of its officer corps, was unprepared for the ferocity of the German assault. Entire divisions were encircled and destroyed. The German pincer movements trapped vast numbers of Soviet troops, leading to massive casualties and surrenders. Cities and towns were bombed into rubble. The Luftwaffe's relentless bombing campaigns devastated Soviet infrastructure and civilian areas. The sheer scale of the onslaught was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Eastern Front became a theater of unprecedented destruction and human suffering, setting the stage for one of the most brutal conflicts in human history. The Eastern Front was a vast battlefield stretching thousands of miles. It was a theater of war where millions of soldiers from both sides clashed in a brutal struggle for supremacy. The sheer scale of the conflict was unprecedented, with entire armies maneuvering across the expansive terrain, facing not only each other, but also the harsh elements of the Russian landscape. Within this inferno, certain battles stand out for their ferocity and strategic significance. These were not just skirmishes, but monumental clashes that would determine the course of the war. Each battle was a test of endurance, strategy, and sheer willpower, with both sides pouring immense resources into the fight. These were the engagements that would decide the fate of nations, the clashes that would etch themselves into the annals of military history. The outcomes of these battles had far-reaching consequences, influencing not only the immediate tactical situation, but also the broader strategic landscape of the war. The Battle of Moscow, from 1941 to 1942, marked the first major setback for the Wehrmacht, the seemingly invincible German army. This battle was a critical moment in the war, as the German forces, which had been advancing rapidly, were suddenly stopped in their tracks. The German advance, hampered by the harsh Russian winter and fierce Soviet resistance, ground to a halt just miles from the Soviet capital. The freezing temperatures and relentless Soviet counterattacks took a heavy toll on the German troops, who were ill-prepared for the severe conditions. It was a turning point, shattering the myth of German invincibility. The failure to capture Moscow was a significant blow to German morale and marked the beginning of a series of defeats that would eventually lead to their downfall. Then came the Battle of Stalingrad from 1942 to 1943. This battle was one of the deadliest in history, with both sides suffering enormous casualties. The city of Stalingrad became a symbol of Soviet determination and resilience. This brutal, months-long struggle for control of a strategically vital city on the Volga River became a symbol of Soviet resistance. The battle was characterized by intense close-quarters combat, with soldiers fighting for every inch of the city. Street by street, house by house, Soviet and German soldiers clashed in a maelstrom of urban warfare. The fighting was relentless, with both sides suffering heavy losses as they battled for control of the city's ruins. The battle raged for months, claiming the lives of nearly 2 million soldiers and civilians. The scale of the destruction was immense, with much of the city reduced to rubble. The German defeat at Stalingrad marked a turning point in the war, shifting the momentum decisively in favor of the Soviets. The victory at Stalingrad boosted Soviet morale and marked the beginning of a major offensive that would eventually push the Germans back. The Battle of Kursk in 1943, the largest tank battle in history, further solidified Soviet dominance. This battle was a critical test of armored warfare, with thousands of tanks clashing in a massive confrontation. The German offensive, intended to regain the initiative, was shattered by the Red Army's determined defense and superior numbers. The Soviet forces, well prepared and strategically positioned, managed to repel the German attack and launch a counteroffensive. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht was in full retreat, steadily pushed back towards its own borders. The series of defeats on the Eastern Front marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, as the Soviet forces continued their relentless advance towards Berlin.